Long before the first comp was built, the space gods have watched and waited for their moment. Choose your gods. Your fate is written in the stars.
Matt, what are you doing? We have playtest in 12 minutes.
Oh, my bad. That's a story for another time. Let's play Space Gods.
Welcome to Space Gods, the set that will send you deep into the cosmos, where mortals, that's you, strike deals with celestial beings. Space Gods is a set designed for flexible play, with a return to our traditional roster size, splashable units, and an emphasis on adapting to game states that are controlled by the gods you align yourself with. I'm Noemi, the set lead. The team and I are here to tell you all about our supernatural roster of traits and champions, new tacticians, arenas, and more.
I'll make sure we wait for you to get back to your desk before we start the lobby.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
But what's the point? He's just gonna open for anyways.
Less appreciated. Hey, folks. I'm Philip, lead designer on the set mechanic. In Space Gods, there is no carousel. There is only the realm of the gods. At the start of the game, 2 of our 9 gods will appear, greeting you and letting you know early on just what space gods are contending for power. That's important because instead of carousel, you'll be selecting an offering from one of the gods, and a less powerful generic one from Pengu, who's a god in our eyes, to say the least. In the realm of the gods, you'll be able to participate in drama on a galactic scale, choosing which god is your favorite. But I'd recommend choosing based on how helpful their offerings are for your game plan. Once you've chosen your god and offering, you'll also get their relic, which represents your fealty and follows you around, letting other players know to whom you've made your allegiance. And regardless of who you picked as your favorite, we've always got good old Pengu to provide a more generic, yet lower power reward, who will be guaranteed for everyone, regardless of whichever god they choose. The Realm of the Gods allows you to power up the way you want, all while witnessing and partaking in a game of sycophantic favoritism. But what's the point in picking favorites and creating conflict if there's no resolution to our celestial drama? Enter the 4/7 boon selection. This is where whichever god you've been choosing the most will come to your board with an armory, similar to the Treasure Dragon of Dragonlands, except with offerings that are thematically tied to that god's personality. They're boon, in addition to some other, more general rewards. Each of our gods has a unique blessing they'll grant to their followers, whether that's Yasuo's, which further upgrades his hexes, or Aurelian Soul's, whose boon offers you a selection of quests with powerful rewards. And even after you've picked your boon, your faith will be continually rewarded, with your favorite god returning to their devout followers' boards to provide loot on occasion for the remainder of the game. So many teams came together to make this mechanic possible, so let's get more dev in this drop and invite Isaac, our set art lead, to tell us some more.
When we heard about the Realm of the Gods, our gears immediately began turning. What would the gods look like? How many should there be? What should their personalities be like?
And how could we pair all of Art's ideas with the design of the mechanic in a way that feels exciting for players?
Exactly. Art took the lead here in deciding which champions would be our gods. We knew we didn't want a lot of overlap with the set's units, and we wanted to use champions that have a distinct lane of personality and cosmic power. One of the first gods the art team landed on is Soraka. Her illustration is just gorgeous and convinced a lot of the team that this was a great direction to move in.
I was certainly convinced. And once we had her look and personality in front of us, the design team got to work on benevolent offerings. For Soraka, that meant HP, both for your units and your tactician.
Yasuo was another one we decided on pretty early. He's dark, brooding, and all edge.
With that attitude, Yasuo became all about skillful positioning, offering hexes that empower the unit on them in spacey ways, with stats, utility, and more.
We couldn't just have one edgy god with Yasuo, we also had to have Evelyn.
I love Eve because she represents such a powerful player experience.
Being lured in by risky power?
Yup. Eve offers powerful rewards that may or may not match your board, like completely random emblems.
But Art didn't just work on creating gods for our mechanic, they also created life, with a summon that is bespoke and newly evergreen to TFT, similar to how Koboko was during Inkborn Fables. Bia, the baby, and Bayan, the mom, are TFT summons that'll be debuting with our Shepherd trait. Summon just Bia to your board at the first breakpoint, then call upon Mama to join, and power up together at the final breakpoint, if you can get your hands on a Shepherd Emblem.
Pray to Evelyn.
With Space Gods, we set out to space with a dynamic, fun, and celestial roster, distributed across the universe, but also a trait web that took what we loved and learned from the flexibility and excitement of past sets. So why don't we start out with a trait that almost all our Space Gods love, Space Groove. With their Starlight Boogie, Groovians can enter the groove, gaining attack speed and health regen, but each unit has its own special way to get their groove on. One-cost Teemo enters the groove whenever he puts enough Shroom Boom poison on an enemy champion that he'll need to attack and stack fast. 4-cost Nami tosses Disco Bubbles at her targets, briefly entering the groove on cast. And then, there's Space Groove's legendary unit, Blitzcrank, and their pit crew of puppers. Once Blitz falls below a certain health threshold, they'll take a beat to repair. After a top-off of oil and Bork bites, they'll re-enter the fight and the groove as they passively fire off zaps and create tragic mishaps, uppercutting their target into the moon. Wait, that's no moon. That's a space disco ball. Opposite to the disco glow is the light-consuming black hole that the Darkstar trait creates. As you feed your black hole enemies, it will empower your units. If you're a fan of finger guns, well, you're in luck, because Jin is taking those literally and cosmically. Almost godlike with his ability, Jin's the high spectacle legendary unit of Darkstar whose galactic finale looks kinda like this. And exploring those stars, dark, supergiants, dwarves, and the likes is our lighthearted Meeple trait. Meeple brings a whole lot of units and a whole lot of meeps, which will strengthen your abilities. Field more Meeples, acquire more meeps. Simple as that. The 5-cost for Meeple, Bard, summons a UFO, which stands for Ultra Friendly Object, that'll deal magic damage per second. Deal enough damage, and you might even beam up an enemy unit. Alright, Major Tom, let's get to a high-stakes trait that's certain to leave ground control and chaos. Anima gathers tech after each combat, more on kills, and even more the higher your loss streak. You can cash out your tech for Anima Squad weapons to use on any unit. Weapons like Battle Bunny Crossbow, which will fire a cone of arrows at enemies if you can get enough crits off. Or the Yumi Bot, which heals the wearer and attaches to nearby friends upon the holder's death. Anything for chin scratches, I suppose. While they're good on anyone, these weapons, and Cat, often have specific users that they're the best on, like Rocket Swarm on Jinx. And even if you deactivate Anima, your items will stick around. Anima's not the only trait using tech that you'll encounter in Space Gods. The Mecha trait will transform Urgot, Aurelion Sol, and Galio into their ultimate mecha forms, granting them stats and enhanced abilities. Once they're mech'd, they'll take up 2 slots and count twice for the Mechas trait. And unlike our Space Gods, our time is short, so before it runs out, I've gotta mention our splashable resource generation trait, Timebreaker. Activate at just 2 Timebreaker, and the trait will give you rerolls when you lose, and XP stored in a temporal core when you win. Once you activate 3 Timebreaker, in addition to its earlier effects, all your allies will gain bonus attack speed. Timebreaker takes learnings from the flex play we love so much in lore and legends. Splash just 2 in early to fuel your econ, or use the 3-piece as the backbone to any 1 or 2-cost reroll line. As you familiarize yourself with the set, you'll notice many 2-piece classes and other origins with breakpoints for each additional unit you add. I've covered just a few of our major origins, but in Space Gods, you'll also be able to overwhelm your enemies with baby swarmlings via Primordian, chart constellations of empowered hexes with Stargazer, and deal powerful signature attacks with Nova. And moving past traits, we've also got a few threat-like units that you can utilize into many end or mid-game boards. Graves, for one, is a build-your-own unit, allowing you to constantly purchase upgrades, unlocking tech trees for customization in the process. And Sona creates commands that buff her allies by telling them what to do and how to do it. Gun Goddess Misfortune will let you choose between 3 unique traits, similar to KO Coliseum's Lee Sin, but as a 3-cost. Misfortune isn't the only low-cost threat-like unit. We've also got utility tanks like Rost and Tahm Kench at 3 and 4 gold respectively to pad out the front line for any comp flexing on the fly. 2 more trait-agnostic 5-cost to end things with, Vex and Shen. Vex is an attack speed-focused hypercarry that'll slap your foes around without a shadow of a doubt, but with shadow, no doubt. While Shen is a bastion who will tear through reality by opening a rift, slowing enemies and accelerating allies' attacks. Alright, I've got a playtest to win. Now, over to Valentine to talk illustration.
So we had a very specific style in mind for the Space Gods that shows off a more traditional style of painting than we've typically seen on TFT. There's no perfect blending, but we obsess over things like brushstrokes and texture, and hopefully as you look closer at these, you'll notice those little details too. The lack of perfect blending is sort of a reflection of our gods too. They're iconic, larger-than-life characters, none of whom are perfect, but we kind of love them for that, right? When we were looking at a champion for the God of Time, most of the team immediately thought of Zillion because he's old, he's godlike, he's got a big clock on his back. But using Zillion as our time god would have just been using Zillion. And for our space god roster, we wanted to elevate existing characters into hyperbolic but flawed godhood. Let me show you what I mean with Echo, the god of time. Echo's a tricky character because we already know him from so many different places. Arcane, true damage, and he's my favorite air-hopping, time-winding champion in 2x KO. So bringing the kid into godliness meant lowering the volume on his emotions in trade of a more stoic, somber, and experienced version of our boy genius. No longer a boy, but still begrudgingly a genius. The way Echo's powers manifest in League is with an after image, allowing him to chrono break back in time. But our god version of him has versions that aren't just backwards in time, but also forwards. We've got Kid Echo in the back trying to grasp the hourglass that present Echo has control over, while the one in the foreground is an older version of Echo. Then it was adding time motifs to show Echo more as time itself, Roman numerals on the clock behind him creating a halo effect, and circular shapes throughout that are all indicative of time. Meanwhile, the golden markings on his skin elevate Echo to make him feel almost ethereal, while also being natural to himself in his color and style. As you play, we hope that you have time to pick up on the little things like this that make each god unique. Thanks for stopping by. Now I'll beam you over to our other team of artists in Singapore.
Hi everyone, I'm João, representing the Singapore team that works on all the cosmetic content you see in TFT. Before we blast off with Space Gods, I wanted to highlight one very special Unbound, entering the convergence for the final patch of Lore and Legends. You've heard of Spin to Win, but with Pengu Garen Unbound, let me introduce you to Spin to Win. Alright, back to our release patch of Space Gods. We've got 2 Unbounds coming for you at the start of the set, starting with the Bringer of Ruin and Darkness. Darkstar Mordekaiser Unbound will unmake the universe. And your lobby if you're lucky, especially with an all-new dual-form boon. After reaching level 7, this boon will unleash a full-screen Mordekaiser ult on your enemies. Then there's Chosen of the Wolf Katarina Unbound, whose look and blades are truly lethal. Watch out for those daggers, they look sharp. Too late. On the cuter end of the spectrum, we've got our Chibis, of course. Chibi Star Guardian Syndra Spheres will pile on with the damage. And on the eviler side of things, we've got Prestige Star Nemesis Morgana. Pair her with an arena fit for an evil queen, First Star's Lament. Finally, before I fly off, we've got Chibi Battle Bat Zaya making her mark on the convergence. The only thing missing is yelling, "Feathers fly!" as your finisher rips through the lobby. We have a lot more on the way throughout the set, so stay tuned. Enjoy Space Gods with patch 17.1. Till next time.